Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. I'm your host, Hannah MacDonald, and I'll be bookending the conversation with some of the most exciting voices from the bookish world. Today I have the pleasure of chatting to Sarah Gilmartin about her latest novel, Service. Sarah is an Irish author and arts journalist. She has an MFA from University College Dublin. Sarah is co-editor of the anthology Stinging Fly Stories, and as a critic, she reviews fiction for the Irish Times. She won Best Playwright at the inaugural Short and Sweet Dublin Festival. Her short stories have been published in the Dublin Review, The Tangerine and New Irish Writing. Her story The Wife won the 2020 Martin Crawford Award at Belfast Book Festival. Sarah is the author of 2 novels. Her debut Dinner Party was an Irish Times bestseller and was shortlisted for Newcomer of the Year at the An Post Irish Book Awards. Her second novel, Service, is out now in paperback and published by Pushkin Press. And here to chat all about it, I have Sarah herself. Welcome to A Pair of Bookends.
Hi, Hannah. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for coming on. So to start off with, I have to ask my favourite question, which is, what are you currently reading?
I am reading a short story collection for pleasure rather than review. So I would usually read one book a week for review as well, but this is just for pleasure, called Old Romantics by an Irish writer. It's a debut, Maggie Armstrong. It's published by Tramp Press. I'm about 2/3 of the way through at the moment, and I'm really, really enjoying it. She has such a strong voice and energy to her writing, and there's an awful lot of humor in it. There's an awful lot of food in it as well, which I like too. And it's about messy relationships and entanglements that the main character gets into over the course of, I'd say, a couple of decades. And for anyone who doesn't think they like short stories, it's actually a great collection to get, because it's almost like this character, Margaret, she's called. We see her emerge over a certain number of years throughout the stories, and certain characters repeat. So it's almost like a novel in stories, a little bit, but not quite. So it's a good, I think, for any readers who don't think they like short stories, I would highly recommend it, and for obviously any readers who do, the same.
I mean, you said messy relationships and there's writing about food, and I was instantly sold. So
Yeah,
that is right up my street.
yeah.
Let's get on to your book, Service. I will go as far to say that this is 100% going to be in my top books of the year, because I absolutely loved it. There was so much about it that resonated with me. And I think that any of us that have worked in hospitality, I did a nice juicy 10-year stint of it. So really down in the trenches, the trenches.
Okay, yeah.
Really in the trenches of it, Jesus. So people that have worked in hospitality are quite well acquainted at the moment with shows like Boiling Point and The Bear, but I hadn't come across something that was so immersed in that world in novel form. So to start with, could you tell our listeners a bit about what Service is about?
It's set in a buzzy, high-end Dublin restaurant at the height of the Celtic Tiger. So that's what we call the boom in Ireland. So around 2007. And then also there's a second story set 10 years later, just as Me Too is starting to happen and unfold over in America and go on to become the big global cultural phenomenon that it did. So there's kind of 2 timelines in the story, and there are 3 narrators. So the story is told from the perspective of Hannah, a waitress who worked in the restaurant the summer she was 21, the Michelin-starred chef Daniel Costello, and then also Daniel's wife Julie. And really, I suppose it's a story about power, the abuse of power, complicity, and who ends up paying, who ends up paying for issues to do with issues around power, kind of at the end of the day, even if they didn't cause any problems themselves.
It's a great exploration of power and of consent. And I was so interested in using the lens of working in a restaurant to look at those themes through, because I worked in a restaurant myself, and certainly there's so many issues with females working in restaurants. You know, if you're working as a waitress, you'll know that they say the customer's always right. questionable. But I had like, men grabbing me when I was like 18, and they're just allowed to do that. And the managers that were working at the time wouldn't do anything about it. They'd just be like, oh well, like it is what it is, sort of feeling. And you really capture that in the book. Now, I wanted to ask about it being set because it's set around the time of the Me Too movement, like you said. And I think that the girl that comes forward in the book about the assault is triggered by the sort of Harvey Weinstein expose sort of thing. But I don't think you actually directly mention that. Am I right in thinking that?
No, there's no direct mentions
But it's
to.
about the whole thing around
Yeah.
social media, yeah. Do you feel that we've progressed in any way since that period of time?
Yes, definitely. I think that there's been, particularly if I look at the two, even if I look at the two timelines in the book in service between
Hmm.
2007 and 2017, and since the Me Too movement, I think that there has been a significant shift worldwide in how we treat women and how we listen to women and how there's a platform for women to speak about these kind of experiences in a way that really, I think, my own experience anyway, in the noughties, there wasn't. So yeah, there's more awareness of these issues about power and how power therefore can be abused. And really, it's kind of an awakening after decades or sorry, centuries of, inequality and things not being quite right, which is why I always think it's funny when you hear people say that, Me Too's over, or we have Me Too fatigue, or, we're done with that. It's like, well, come back to me in another couple of centuries and then
Yeah,
maybe. But yeah, so I think there's been a social shift.
yeah.
I think the law, and this is another thing I address in the book, the law has been slower to change. And I mean, that's understandable in one way. You can't change the laws of a country overnight. But in Ireland, which is the legal system that I would be familiar with, the onus really is all on the victim
Hmm.
to bring the case, or to, first of all, to report the crime, and then if the crime does get to court, really the onus is all on them. The burden of proof is all on them,
Hmm.
and it's a really difficult reporting. It's a really difficult experience for someone who's being sexually abused or raped to then kind of have to go and relive it all in the way that they're expected to at the moment in the court system. So I think, there's definitely the Minister for Justice, Helen McAtee in Ireland, for many years now, I think, has been looking at this issue, and hopefully things are going to change around the reporting procedures, to make it easier for crimes of this nature to be reported, to be prosecuted, and hopefully to lead to convictions, because the statistics are really, really depressing. I looked at the statistics on the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre. They're great. They publish their reports every single year. And I think the year I was looking at the time was 2021. And I think the conviction rate for the number of rapes and sexual abuses that have been reported, it was like 2%. So when you think about that really depressing statistic, you understand why so many women, or why so many people generally, don't come forward and don't report these kind of crimes. So it's kind of a
Yeah.
system that doesn't really encourage justice as it is. So yeah, changes definitely in a kind of a social way, in terms of an awareness, in terms of people being able to speak, but the more, the more kind of serious end of things, the more legal end of things, still needs a lot of work.
Yeah, for sure. And you're not wrong. The statistics are really depressing to look at. Now you just mentioned there the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, which I think you wrote in your acknowledgements that you spoke with them during the writing of this book. Could you tell us how speaking with them did that help shape the writing of the case in your book?
Yeah, definitely. So the head of the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre at the time, Nolene Blackwell, she spoke to me and kind of went through all the different hurdles that people have to get to, or need to go through if they're going to report a crime. And she brought me through the statistics of, kind of years gone past as well, and what needed to be changed. So I definitely looked at that. I suppose one of the things to say about the book, that the waitress Hannah, it's not her trial. There's another waitress 10 years later. Hannah kind of left the restaurant. She kind of, left on, there was no repercussions around things. She just kind of walked out of the restaurant, left the job after the summer. But it's this new trial 10 years later that is causing her to
Hmm.
look back on her time there and to think, okay, well, maybe I need to have another good, long, hard look at this. But actually, in a way, some of the stuff she's remembering, she doesn't even really want to remember. So again, there's that sense of a reckoning or an awakening in for her as the book begins and over the course of the book. But with her as a narrator, there's obviously dark subject matter in service, but I didn't want it to be, all miserable and depressing, because I find personally myself, I've worked as a waitress. The restaurant world is very exciting. It's very fast paced. It's very colorful. So a lot of the time, Hannah is talking about her experiences before things went wrong. Is kind of that end of things or that world, but also I suppose the more kind of casual aspects of working in a restaurant, which you've referred to yourself at the start of a customer grabbing you for a second or something like that, and it all gets swallowed into service, and you're the one who's expected to be the professional about it, and you don't really have any recourse, if you want to keep your job. Almost I wanted to get that culture across of customers, particularly in this fine dining, buzzy establishment, a lot of businessmen, a lot of politicians, where they're paying huge prices, there's a lot of money flying around, and they think by extension that it's not just the food on the plate, and it's not just the alcohol that's gone in that they're drinking, that they're entitled to. There's that kind of level of entitlement that their money gets them whatever it is they want.
You just made me think of there's a really agonizing moment in the book where Hannah is serving a reviewer and she thinks that she's saying the right thing to him. She repeats back to the chefs what she's said, and they're like, what do you mean you said that? And there is, but I think you really do capture the sort of pace and atmosphere of a restaurant in both the oh, exciting, we're having a drink after work, we're all like a big family, it's all fun and games, and also you slipping up and doing something or saying something wrong and having a plate launched at you across the kitchen. It's that sort, you capture both sides of it really, really well. And I wanted to ask about that because I wanted to know, how did you manage to sort of capture the kind of choreography of working in a restaurant?
So a lot of that I drew on, in terms of the environment, I drew on my own experience as a waitress. So I worked for many summers during college and also into my early 20s as a waitress in different places. Actually, a lot of the time over in America, New York and Long Island. So it was a very kind of, and I think in America particularly, they take their restaurants very, very seriously in a way that I hadn't seen here before. So I knew the world from that, the good, the bad, the fun, that kind of sense of camaraderie, of sisterhood, of, you said it earlier, of being in the trenches. That's what it's like. Everyone kind of working together with precision and chaos coming together, colliding, and then the giant release at the end of the shift where, you get a drink and then you get another drink and another drink. And you don't have to be in again the next morning, or, you don't have to be in again the next day until 3 or 4. So it's a process that can, be repeated, particularly when you're in your early 20s. I don't know if I'd be able to do it now.
No. I was literally speaking about this earlier. I was speaking to a friend about it, and I was saying that how you would, I would be working a really long shift, and then we'd be like, right, fuck it, should we go out? And then we'd change in the staff room, leave all our clothes there, go out, and then we'd rock back up the next morning, change back into those stinky clothes, and then crack on and do a shift. It's like, I could never do that now, never. It's just absolute insanity. But yeah, I wanted to ask actually about the perspectives, which you've touched on a little bit, because like you said, we've got the 3 perspectives. We've got Daniel, the sort of famed chef who's accused of sexual assault. We have his wife, Julie, and then we have Hannah, who is one of the waitresses. How did you go about choosing which perspectives to show us and how much to sort of reveal from each person, if that makes sense?
Yeah, completely. So initially, when I conceived the book, I thought from female perspectives. I thought of Hannah, I thought of a waitress, and then I thought of Julie, because I've been reading a lot of, this is even before I came up with the restaurant story. I've been reading, like most other women, a lot about Me Too in the papers and online. And it always struck me when I was reading the stories, they'd often have like a photo of whoever it is was accused, plus their current partner. And I just really empathized with that woman, who is obviously, she's not the most sympathetic person in these kinds of stories, but she is being victimized in another kind of way where she can't speak and yet she's kind of accompanying this guy around and lives with him. So I kind of thought that's interesting. And there's a gap there because, they're not speaking, there's no words, I don't know what they're thinking. So that's what I kind of thought about in terms of kind of Julie and the wife. And then obviously Hannah was an interesting one. The way the whole idea came about for the book was I've been reading about Me Too, and then a friend of mine who is an Irish actress, she asked me to write an original piece of writing for stage for an audition for the Abbey. And I wrote, I don't know, it was like 600 or 700 words in a voice because, she's an actress. She needs to get up and say it. And that went on to become, part of the opening pages or initial pages of service. So I think from the very beginning, I knew it was going to be a voice-driven novel. It was going to be in first person, or, Julie's a mix of first person or second person. So I had those two voices. And then somewhere along the way in the first draft, I kind of thought, okay, these are coming together, but the story is feeling quite not in balance because I feel like Daniel needs to also have his say, because he certainly, it was emerging to me, or it was becoming, I was realizing as I was writing these scenes that Daniel was having a very different perspective, even in his language, in his dialogue, to what was going on, to what, maybe some of the women thought. So it ended up that I wrote the three perspectives, and they're all equally weighted. They have the same number of chapters, roughly even, as it turned out, the same number of words. So I very much wanted the reader to make up their own mind, to kind of see the action of the story, to get to know the characters, and then, rather than, I don't really, as a reader myself, like stories that kind of feel didactic or tell you this is how you should be feeling, or this is the good thing and this is the bad thing,
Yeah.
So
I think it's so interesting you mentioned about the Me Too stories and reading around that, and you see the pictures, like you said, of the people that have been accused, and then you see their wives next to them, and you do see people tarnishing them with the same brush. And it I don't know, I've probably been guilty of that myself, in thinking that, like, how could you allow that to happen? But some people don't know that that's happening, and you can't. It's not them that have done the thing wrong. Do you know what I mean? So it's a weird one. So it was really interesting to sort of get into Julie's head and sort of experience her perspective and see her side of things. And I think there's a line in the book that really stuck with me where she says, "I was trying to remember who I was before I became your wife." And I think it's that, like, she's so wrapped up in the world of him, obviously him as like the celebrity chef, but also him in the context of this case.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they've known each other since school, so she's been with him a very long time. Neither of them came from a wealthy background. They kind of grew up together, really, and she helped him in as much as he helped her become the couple that they are. And, in terms of, they've got two teenage sons, they've got a lovely house in Dublin, and in a wealthy part of Dublin. They've got this restaurant and this element of fame because of what Daniel does in his job and how much he has achieved. But yeah, for much of the book, Julie is, I mean, she's reeling, she's seething, really. And a lot of that rage is turned towards Daniel because, what has he done to their life? But also that rage is kind of turned inward, that, if these things that certain women are saying about her husband are true, how did she not notice them? How did she not see this? She knows him better than anybody, or she thinks she does anyway. So what kind of reality has she been living in for the last 20 or 30 years if this other kind of reality is going on too? And also, how is that even possible, that like a person can be so very different to different people? I think I'm interested in that generally, aside from this particular novel, that kind of the sides we show of ourselves to different people, and how relationships and different connections bring out different sides to people.
And one of the things that I found quite upsetting is obviously how it had affected their family, but also the parents of sons, and what the impact of what that might be if they see their father sort of getting away with this. Was it a conscious choice for them to have sons and for them to sort of absorb some of what was going on?
Yeah, I thought. I mean, I thought at one point I was like, maybe I'll give them a daughter, because that's interesting
Yeah,
too.
of
There's a teen
course.
in the house, and these things are being leveled against him. But I felt early on that Daniel was the father of two sons. I just kind of, it was, I didn't even really think about it that much. I was just like, no, this is the story. And one is in the book. One is like 15 and one is 13. And the 15-year-old, Kevin, the eldest, he has just, he's a difficult relationship with his dad anyway. They're kind of alike. They're both strong-headed, stubborn characters. So he just goes all out scorched earth against his dad. He's like, if they're saying, you did these things, you did these things.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Oscar is the younger kid and he's a bit more vulnerable and he really looks up to his father. So he's grappling with with that, this man that he thinks is amazing is suddenly no longer considered to be.
I think it was really great as well that we saw him have for Daniel to be the one that has this kind of fraught relationship with his children rather than it be Hannah that has a fraught relationship with her parents, because I don't know if this was the direction that you were going in, but I watched a YouTube video this morning. Weirdly, I don't know if it's because I mentioned that I was reading this book to my sisters, but they were talking about the consent and the consent and tea video. Have you seen it?
No, no, I
No,
think.
so it's like a police somewhere in the UK. I can't remember which part of the UK they are, but they released this video on YouTube and it was like explaining consent, but by asking people if they want a cup of tea. And it's not entirely great, but
Yeah,
I could
it's
see what
kind
they
of
were trying to do. But I saw somebody from another university in the UK who sort of took that on board and was like, okay, here's what they were trying to say, but
Mhm.
here's like, a more nuanced portrait of how we should be looking at consent. And then of course there was a male in the comments being like, how's your relationship with your dad? And I was like, fuck you.
Oh,
But that made me so cross. But then I was like, it was great that there's no room for argument with this, with Hannah. I mean, obviously, I don't think any female is going to kind of see it from that perspective, but I know that that's an argument that always kind of comes into it. It's like, oh, well, she must have daddy issues then. And like, that's absolutely not the case.
yeah, no, Hannah in the book, she is I mean, she's kind of separate from her parents because she's
Yeah.
gone off to college in Dublin, but she has a great relationship with them generally or
Hmm.
with the family. And actually, one of my favorite scenes in the book is her mom and dad are up in Dublin for something else, and they drop into the restaurant.
Don't,
And
it made me cry.
again, like their world is just it's so separate from the world of tea, which is what the restaurant is called in the book. They don't have, they don't have a whole lot of money, certainly not in comparison to the people that Hannah is serving in the restaurant. So they're just completely overawed. Well, the mom is completely overawed by kind of the glamour, and Daniel comes out and he makes a big thing and he gives them a voucher, and the mom is delighted. She kind of skips up the steps, but the dad just has a kind of he's a quieter man. He considers things quite deeply,
Hmm.
and he knows, even though they're only in the restaurant maybe 5-10 minutes, because of course they couldn't get them a table because it's just so hard to get into this restaurant. You can just kind of see it in his behavior that there's something going on for him,
Yeah.
which he doesn't know how to name either.
Hmm. Yeah, but there's so much pride from them as well. But that moment made me cry. It's just like
Oh,
it's so moving, and you see this kind of contrast, like you said, between they don't come from a lot, and then they come into the kind of this luxury restaurant. And I did wonder actually if because Daniel is this self-made chef, isn't he? If that's what initially attracts him to Hannah, in that he can kind of recognize parts of himself in her.
yeah, quite possibly. He would definitely tend to favor more, people who do things for themselves, who are out on
Mm,
their own, who, don't have, as I think he says in the book, things literally, pardon the pun, handed to them on a plate.
yeah.
Which is also why I think he has like a tough enough relationship with his eldest son, because even though he's giving him, all of, the son is in a fancy Dublin school and he's getting all of the benefits and the perks of Daniel's hard work, part of him kind of thinks that, the real way to make a man, in inverted commas, is that, you have to do it through graft, I suppose. So yeah, he sees that in Hannah, and he sees she's keen and she's interested. She has a good palate herself, which is another thing that he notices. And I guess, yeah, he sees himself for a lot of the book, or for some of the book, as a mentor, but that there's a kind of a kindred,
Mm.
yep.
I was curious, what was it like to step into his shoes and write his perspective? What was that experience like?
I actually find it bizarrely, I will say now, entertaining. I found him to be an entertaining character, which I was not really expecting at all.
Mm-hmm.
But he's quite a charismatic person. He's smart. He's hardworking, ambitious. He's achieved a lot, but also he's gotten to a kind of age. He's in the contemporary timeline. He's maybe coming up to his 60s, his 60th birthday. So there's a kind of false sense of humility about him that I find quite funny. So he'll say stuff like, "I'm just like you. Open my presses at home. All I have is ketchup and mayo as well. I'm a man of the people." That kind of thing.
Yeah.
But really, he doesn't believe that at all. He thinks he's great. So that kind of gap between what he's saying and actually what he thinks of himself, I find that quite amusing. And I try to use that in a way, to make it amusing in the book as well. But there is obviously, another darker side to him. I don't know if you would call him a predator. Certainly, I mean, from his perspective, he doesn't think he is at all. But he does have certain narcissistic traits that I think are common to many people who achieve very highly in whatever field they have, people who get right to the top of, it could be business, it could be anything, where they use other people in order to achieve their aims. So, other people become less so, dehumanized in a way that they're there to help this person achieve whatever or quell their desires or insecurities or whatever it might be. So I think there is an element definitely of that to Daniel, where he doesn't really see the person. He kind of sees how the effect the person has on him or how he can maybe use them. So that was interesting. And then probably the final thing about Daniel is he is, for the first time in his life, a man who is not working because his restaurant is closed in the contemporary time as the trial kind of starts. And he has been working like long 16-hour days since he was 15 years old, since he dropped out of school to go into the business. And he's had no time for reflection. So he's not a man really given to reflection or to stopping. So for the first time in his life, he's kind of taking a long, hard look at himself over years or over decades. So there's more than a whiff of midlife crisis, of late midlife, a late midlife of him as well. So yeah, there's a lot going on for him. And I think one of the reasons why his voice came so easily to me when I started writing it was that I had written in the first or second draft, maybe 20,000 words from Daniel's perspective when he was a kid and a teenager. So kind of from around the age of like 10 up to 16 when he goes to work. So I had all, I had loads of scenes and they were all, they were good. I had polished them or whatever. But I realized at some point, I was like, this is not relevant to the story that I'm trying to tell in service. So it's just weight, it's dead weight. So it killed me, but I cut the 20,000 words.
No.
Yeah. But then when I went to write him as an adult, actually, those 20,000 words really stood to me because they were all in the back of my head. So I didn't have to, stop every paragraph and be like, oh, well, what would he think on this or whatever? It was just like, it was like a person I knew and I was writing.
And that definitely comes across. He's like such a nuanced, like well fleshed out character. And it's so funny because, as you were saying, he is this very charismatic, ambitious person. And he has so much confidence in himself that, like, for part of the book, I was completely on side with him. I was like, oh, like, and it's not the kind of person that I would put myself on side with usually. But as I was reading the book, I was like, oh, wait, like, has he done anything wrong here? Like, what's going on? So like, it was really interesting that you kind of toyed with that and used his perspective because, yeah, I was falling for his charm a bit too much.
I think I think it's just good practice to do that in fiction anyway, because if somebody's an outright, hero or an outright villain, they're not reflective of, a human being in reality, because nobody is either,
No.
fundamentally 100% good or 100% bad. So definitely, yeah, whenever I'm writing characters at all, you try and draw on both.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to ask as well about Julie's sections because and I hope this isn't a spoiler and I hope you'll let me ask, but they're directed towards Daniel.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know why did you want this sort of ongoing dialogue between them in the book?
It's the rage, really. It's her rage towards him, but also it's the rage that she's keeping in reality. So in reality, I mean, they're not getting on great. Don't get me on. There's a lot of silence and there's a lot of love. There may be some door slamming and various other things like that, going on in the house. But she's still turning up to court with him. She's still going in, sitting beside him, all of that. But I wanted her to have an outlet where she could actually say to him what she wanted to say. And it's almost like an excavation for Julie, where as she's talking to him in her head, kind of having the argument before they later, at some point they do end up having the mother of all arguments. And she's exhausted by it as well. She's exhausted by over the course of the book, by his protestations, that he hasn't, that these girls are essentially making up what they're saying, because, quite a few of the comments are quite flimsy in nature, certainly in a legal capacity. A lot of the stuff that was said on social media, nothing got done with it legally because the lawyers viewed that there was no substance to what people were saying. So it's all a bit murky, and she needs to work it out in her head, what she thinks about him before she speaks to him herself. And also I think she's probably grappling with her own complicity in his story, in their marriage. She's not heavily involved in the restaurant world, but she's worked there a few times. She knows, she's definitely in and out a lot of the time. She'll know the staff, and what has she been complicit to, or what has she turned her eyes away from? So there's a lot of that going on for Julie, and that's why I chose that she would direct the narrative to him. And well, actually, I don't want to say any more about that, because there is a kind of change to it at the end, and I don't really want to give that away. But the other thing, I suppose, practically from a craft perspective is, when you've got two female characters, even though their ages are quite different in the book and their backgrounds are different, I was looking for a point of difference, because a lot of first person narrative for three different narrators for the same book can be a lot of eye to take. So giving Julie the you, or the second person voice, was also a point of difference for the reader as well. It was almost like a break away from the I of Hannah and Danielle's narratives.
I've just remembered something that you said earlier, actually, and I really want to ask about that because of the way that you write character, and you write characters so well. But you mentioned earlier that Hannah, going back to Hannah, started out for your friend who's an actress, and you wrote, I think what ended up being Hannah's section, you wrote for her to perform. And I'm an actor myself, and Hannah would be literally like such an incredible role to play if this was adapted. And I saw that you have written for theatre, but do you write for screen as well?
No screen. I've done a couple of screenwriting courses, and I did a few during COVID, and I'm fascinated by that process.
Yes.
There's some kind of part of my brain that doesn't fully get it, like the formula of, what beats you have to hit by certain pages. But I would love to be able to. I'm kind of fascinated by
because I was kind of curious if Service would end up being adapted at any point.
Well, I mean, fingers
I'm
crossed.
hopeful.
Yeah. I can't say a whole lot about it, but there's definitely been interest.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, especially because we're really loving the restaurant dramas at the moment, and I'm definitely hungry for more. But I'm hungry for more of this because it's the female stories, and we get a lot of how difficult it is for men working in those industries. But this was so powerful because it's what it's like for the women, and that obviously really resonated with me. So thank you for writing it. I absolutely loved it. And for our listeners, please go and buy this book. I'm going to put a link in the show notes for you to order yourselves a copy. I believe it's out in the UK, but it is out in the UK in paperback. But where else can they grab themselves a copy? Is it Ireland as well?
Yeah, Ireland, the UK. It's actually coming out in the States as well on June 4th, so a couple of days earlier.
Amazing.
Yeah, so your local independent bookshops, ideally, or any bookshops, or online as well. Yeah, so it'll be great to kind of see the paperback has a new really cool cover from
in the UK. The paperback cover.
Actually, yes, the paperback version that's coming out in June has. I love the cover of it.
I've seen a new paperback cover and it's absolutely gorgeous. I managed to nab this copy in a charity shop and I was very pleased. And it's signed by you, so that's really great.
Oh,
but I have, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I have folded so many pages down and
put
lots of markings around quotes because it's just so beautifully written. I absolutely loved it.
I do that myself.
Oh,
quite a
well,
lot.
that makes me happy because some people really don't like that. Before I let you go, I want to know what is next for you.
So I am working on my third book, third novel. I was lucky enough we have a great arts council in Ireland, and I was lucky enough to get a grant for this book. So it's given me a bit of time to step away from journalism a little bit over the course of this year and just focus on that. So it's getting there. A bit of a dry patch in autumn, but this year since January has gone very well with it. So I'm hopeful to have something. I mean, I have no idea really when.
Well,
Uncertain.
I'm excited to read more of your work, so yeah, I can't wait for that. Before I actually let you go, I have to ask for a recommendation. So, what would you like to
Oh.
recommend to the listeners?
So book-wise, actually I'm going to sound like I'm obsessed with short stories, but another really, really good collection of short stories I read recently, I reviewed it, is Lucy Caldwell's Opening.
I
It's
really want to read this.
really good. So it's the third in a kind of loose triptych of collections she's done. The first one's Multitudes, the second one is Intimacies, and then
Hmm.
this, and they're all brilliant.
Yeah.
And they're all, you know, they're mainly about female characters, but the occasional male comes up as well. But she writes women so brilliantly. I'd highly recommend that. And TV wise, actually, I have been watching the second season. I just finished it of Blue Lights, has just come out.
So good.
It's really good. It's for listeners who don't know what it is, it's it's a police show basically set in the north of Ireland. And it is it's really, really tightly written. It's really fun, but it also tackles like really heavy duty subject matter. But I'm in a WhatsApp group with a couple of lads and I was recommending it to them. And I think at the start they were like, oh, the North, I don't know, you know, the very things or whatever, or we haven't seen good TV. And I was like, no, watch it. And now they're all on the first season and they're loving it.
It's
So,
incredible. My friend Kelsey's in the second season of it, and
oh, no way.
yeah, and when she told me she got the role, I was so happy for her, but at the same time, I was so jealous because it's so
Who did she
good.
play for? Which of the characters did
I
she?
actually can't remember her character's name, but she played the person that is from that community, the guy that owns the pub, and
Yeah.
she works with him, and she's like filming all the stuff that's going on. I really
Oh,
can't
yeah.
remember her name.
Yeah, she lives around and he sorts her out
He
with
sorts her out, yeah. He
with
sorts her
money
out
and
and sorts her family
kind of
out. Yeah,
integrity
that's
context.
her. So yeah, it's
And
gonna really annoy me that I can't remember her name, but yeah, I've never been more jealous of one of my friends.
it's great. Do you know what I love about it as well? The first season kind of it was like clever writing. They focused on like a number of pairs. So it was kind of like a pair of cops, and then you'd switch to the next pair of cops and the next one, kind of trainee cops that were kind of coming into the force for the first time. But the dialogue in it is just spot
So
on.
good.
There's no exposition. There's no, oh, I'm only saying this because I need, the readers to know or the viewers to know the plot. It's all actually quite natural. And there's a lot of humor in it as well. So
Yes.
yeah, that's my
It's so
recommendation.
fun. It is very, very funny. But it's just one of those really clever things where they can have you like laughing 1 minute, like fully cackling, and then
Mhm.
have you like sobbing 10 minutes later. And it's just I don't know how they do it.
Yeah, those emotional swings. Love it.
For sure. You also write dialogue very well, and I'm very much a dialogue lover, so I have to just quickly mention that. But Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute joy chatting to you. Can our listeners find you on social media? I wasn't sure if you're on there.
I am. I feel like it's just very ancient saying this. I'm not on Instagram. I'm a Luddite, but I am on Twitter.
Okay,
So I'm at Sarah Gilmartin on Twitter with the
perfect.
underscore at the end because some real Sarah Gilmartin stole my actual handle years ago.
Unbelievable. Shocking. I'll pop a link in the show notes for that. I'll pop a link in the show notes for your book, and hopefully our listeners will go and order themselves a copy and they can give you a follow. Listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please do rate, review, and subscribe. And if you want to give us a follow, you can do so at A Pair of Bookends Pod on Instagram and at A Pair of Bookends on Twitter and TikTok. Thank you so much again, Sarah. I've absolutely loved this, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna.
Goodbye, listeners.